You said no. It was a simple no. A decision you had made, considered, arrived at through your own reasoning. It didn't require a committee. It didn't require consensus. It was yours. And then the other person looked at you. Not angry, not confrontational, just slightly surprised. And something happened that you didn't plan and couldn't stop. You started explaining. One sentence became three. Three became a paragraph. The paragraph became a conversation you hadn't intended to have about a decision you had already made. You explained the context. You explained the reasoning. You explained what you had considered and what you had ruled out, and why the outcome made sense given everything you knew at the time. And somewhere in the middle of it, you noticed something. The more you explained, the more questions arrived. The more you justified, the more the other person leaned in. Not satisfied, but interested. Not convinced, but engaged. As if each explanation was not closing the conversation, but opening it further. As if the information you were providing was not answering the question, but generating new ones. And by the end, you had spent 10 minutes defending a decision that needed 10 seconds. Or no seconds at all. Because the decision was yours, and it didn't require a defense. The question you were left with wasn't about the decision. It was about the moment you stopped deciding and started asking for permission. This moment happens more often than most people realize, not just in the dramatic confrontations, not just when the decision is large and the stakes are high, and the other person is someone whose opinion genuinely matters. It happens in small moments. The plan you adjusted because someone raised an eyebrow. The preference you softened because you sensed it would be unpopular. The choice you explained at length, not because the other person asked for an explanation, but because their silence felt like a question you needed to answer. Each of these small moments is the same exchange as the larger ones. A decision exits your authority and enters a negotiation, and the negotiation is almost always less favorable than the original decision. Most people believe they explain because they want to be understood. This feels true. It feels like the generous interpretation that the explaining comes from a desire for clarity, for connection, for the reasonable hope that if the other person has enough information, they will understand and perhaps even agree. But this is rarely the real reason. The real reason is fear. Fear of being seen as selfish. Fear of appearing arrogant, of being the person who makes decisions without explanation, who moves without consultation, who treats their own judgment as sufficient when it clearly, visibly, makes others uncomfortable. Fear of being judged without context, of having your choice evaluated without the full picture that would make it make sense. Fear of being misunderstood by someone whose understanding, for reasons you may not fully be able to name, matters to you. The explanation is an attempt to control perception, to manage, through the provision of information, how you are seen by the person in front of you, to construct, through the careful layering of context and reasoning, a version of events in which your decision is not just defensible but obviously correct. So obviously correct that no reasonable person could object to it. This attempt fails. Not sometimes. Every time. Because the control you are seeking is impossible. You cannot determine through explanation how someone else chooses to perceive you. You can provide information. You cannot control what they do with it. And the pursuit of that control, the ongoing escalating effort to say enough, to add enough, to be clear enough that the uncertainty finally resolves into approval, produces the opposite of what it seeks. It produces dependence. The more you explain, the more your decisions require explanation to feel valid. The more you justify, the more your choices seem to need justification to stand. You are not building confidence in the other person. You are building the habit of seeking their confidence. And habits, as anyone who has tried to break one understands, are very difficult to reverse once they are established. There is something else underneath the fear that is worth naming. The overexplainer is often someone who has learned, through specific experiences, that their judgment was not trusted, that the decisions they made were questioned, reversed, or penalized, that moving without explanation produced friction that was more expensive than the explanation would have been. And so they learned to explain preemptively, to provide the context before it was demanded, to make the case before the verdict arrived. This learning made sense in the environment that produced it. The problem is that it follows them into environments where it no longer applies, where the questioning is not the precursor to a reversal, but simply the questioning of someone who has learned that questioning produces results. The habit that protected them once now exposes them everywhere. Here is the part that most people never see. The excessive explanation does not communicate what you think it communicates. You believe it communicates clarity, transparency, the reasonable willingness of someone who has nothing to hide and is happy to share their thinking. What it actually communicates is uncertainty, not about the facts you are providing, about your right to the decision itself. Each additional justification carries a silent message that the words don't say. I need you to agree with this. I need you to approve of this. I need you to validate what I did so that I can continue to believe it was the right thing to do. That message is received, not always consciously, not in the form of a thought the other person has and can articulate, but in the form of a recalibration, a shift in how they understand the relationship between your decisions and their responses to those decisions. They learn that questioning produces results, that expressing surprise produces explanation, that pushing back generates justification, that the skeptical look, the raised eyebrow, the simple silence that suggests uncertainty. Each of these produces more information, more context, more of the specific material that confirms their position, as someone whose approval is required for your decisions to feel legitimate. And what produces results gets repeated. This is the mechanism that most people who overexplain never understand about what is happening to them. They believe they are being asked to explain. They are not. They are being trained to explain. By the repeated experience of providing explanation in response to pressure, they have taught the people around them that pressure works, that doubt produces justification, that the questioning of their choices is not just acceptable but productive, because it reliably generates the engagement, the vulnerability, the sustained access to their decision-making process that the questioner has learned to expect. The overexplainer does not have a communication problem. They have a feedback loop problem, and the loop was built by their own responses. Consider what this means over time. In a professional environment where over-explaining has become the pattern, the decisions you make become negotiable by default. Not because they are wrong, because your behavior has established that they can be reopened through the application of doubt. Every decision you defend becomes an invitation to reopen. Every justification you offer becomes evidence that the decision was not final, and the person or the environment that has learned this about you will use it, not necessarily from malice, but from the entirely ordinary tendency to take the paths that are available. If your decisions can be influenced through questioning, they will be questioned. If your positions can be shifted through expressed doubt, doubt will be expressed. You have made yourself movable, and movable things get moved. Consider what this means over time. In a professional environment where over-explaining has become the pattern, the decisions you make become negotiable by default. Not because they are wrong, because your behavior has established that they can be reopened through the application of doubt. Every decision you defend becomes an invitation to reopen. Every justification you offer becomes evidence that the decision was not final. And the person or the environment that has learned this about you will use it, not necessarily from malice, but from the entirely ordinary tendency to take the paths that are available. If your decisions can be influenced through questioning, they will be questioned. If your positions can be shifted through expressed doubt, doubt will be expressed. You have made yourself movable, and movable things get moved. The compounding effect of this over years in a professional context is significant. The person who consistently over-explains finds that their role slowly expands to include the ongoing justification of decisions that their peers simply make. They spend energy in meetings that others do not spend. They carry the weight of persuasion in every interaction. They arrive at decisions already anticipating the explanation they will need to provide, which means the decision-making itself is shaped by the anticipated need to defend it. The decision that would be most right is sometimes not the decision that is easiest to explain. And the person who has learned that all decisions require explanation will, over time, unconsciously favor the decisions that are easiest to justify over the decisions that are actually best. Think about the people you most respect, not the most vocal, not the most visible. Not the ones who fill every room with the sound of their reasoning and the weight of their justifications. The ones who carry a specific quality of settled authority, whose decisions land with weight, whose positions are taken seriously, whose presence in a room changes the quality of the decisions made there. How much do they explain? Not much. Not compared to the people around them. They speak when they have something to say. They offer context when context serves clarity rather than approval. They listen to objections with genuine attention. And then they do what they decided to do. Their conviction does not require the room's confirmation to remain valid. This is the quality that produces respect. Not intelligence, though many of them are intelligent. Not aggression, though some of them are direct. The specific settledness of someone whose internal sense of their own judgment is not contingent on external validation. Who has made a decision, and the decision is made, and what you think about it, is information they may consider but not material they need in order to proceed. This quality is not arrogance. Arrogance dismisses other perspectives because it has decided it is superior. This is something different. It receives other perspectives, genuinely without defensiveness, and then acts from its own center rather than from the aggregate of everyone's opinion. The difference is visible. Arrogance is reactive even if the reaction is dismissal. This settledness is non-reactive. The challenge arrives and the settled person considers it and continues in the direction they were going, not because they are certain they are right, because their confidence is in their own process of deciding, not in the outcome of any particular decision, and that confidence does not require anyone else to share it. Machiavelli understood this as a foundational element of effective leadership. The prince who requires his court's approval for every decision trains his court to withhold approval strategically, to use that approval as leverage, as a tool for influencing decisions in their favor. The prince who acts from his own judgment and explains only when explanation serves clarity, rather than approval, removes that leverage from the room. His decisions are not subject to the ongoing negotiation that produces compromise and incoherence. They are subject to his own reasoning. And his own reasoning, however imperfect, is at least consistent. There is a distinction that changes everything about how you communicate. Explaining for clarity is different from explaining for permission. Clarity informs. It answers a question that was genuinely asked. It provides context that the other person needs to act effectively. It serves the conversation's actual purpose, rather than your need to be seen as having made the right choice. Permission implores. It adds context that wasn't requested. It answers questions that haven't been asked in an attempt to preempt questions that might be. It provides information not because the other person needs it to function, but because you need them to agree in order to feel certain that you were right. The first is generosity. The second is anxiety wearing the costume of generosity. And the difference between them is felt before it is understood. The person receiving genuine clarity experiences it as useful. The person receiving excessive justification experiences it as something else, as an invitation to continue questioning, as evidence that the questioner's position is still open for revision, as confirmation that their engagement with your decision is both welcome and productive. Most people, when they overexplain, believe they are doing the first. They are doing the second. Learning to tell the difference in real time requires a specific kind of self-honesty. Before you add the next sentence, before you provide the additional context, the further reasoning, the elaborated justification, ask yourself who this next sentence is for. Is it for them because they need the information to understand what you are asking of them? Or is it for you because their silence or their expression or their energy in the room has produced an anxiety that the sentence is designed to resolve? If it is for you, it is permission-seeking, and it will produce the opposite of what you are looking for. The practical shift that follows this understanding is not dramatic. You do not become someone who stops communicating. You become someone who stops when the communication has served its actual purpose, who says what needs to be said and notices the impulse to say more and asks, before acting on that impulse, whether the more serves the situation or serves the anxiety. Who learns to sit with the silence that follows a complete statement, the silence that used to feel like an invitation to add more, and discovers that the silence is not a question. It is simply the space after something has been said. And the person who can occupy that space without filling it is the person whose words carry more weight than the words of someone who never stops. Here is a concrete practice. The next time you feel the impulse to add another sentence after you have made your point, pause, not dramatically. Simply wait a moment before the next word. In that pause, ask whether the additional sentence serves the other person or serves your anxiety, whether it adds something they need or removes something you fear. Most of the time, in that pause, you will discover that the sentence was for you, that the point had been made, that the silence that followed was not a question, but simply the space after something was said, and that the person who can sit in that space, who can let their statement stand without rushing to reinforce it, is the person whose statements people actually receive. This pause is not passive. It is one of the most active things available to someone who has been over-explaining. It requires the specific courage of someone who is willing to be misunderstood temporarily in exchange for the longer-term gain of being taken seriously. It requires tolerating the uncertainty of not knowing how your statement was received without immediately attempting to manage that reception through additional information. It requires trusting, without immediate confirmation, that what you said was enough. That trust, practiced consistently, becomes the foundation of a different relationship to your own words, one in which what you say carries weight because it arrives with finality rather than with the endless elaboration that signals it is still open for discussion. The person who explains everything is constantly trying to prove that their choices are legitimate. They are asking, through each explanation, for a verdict, for the specific confirmation that what they did was correct, that their reasoning was sound, that a reasonable person in their position would have done the same thing. They are submitting their decisions for review. And in submitting them, they are treating them as provisional, as things that might or might not stand depending on what the reviewer decides. The respected person does not do this, not because they are always right. They are not. Not because their decisions are beyond question. They aren't. But because they understand something that the over-explainer has not yet learned. Not every decision needs to be understood to remain valid. Not every choice needs to be approved to remain correct. The decision was made from the information available, through the judgment available, by the person whose decision it was to make. Its legitimacy does not depend on whether the person being informed of it finds it persuasive. Their persuasion was never the criterion. Their persuasion was never the point. Confidence is not the ability to explain everything. It is the ability to not need to explain beyond what serves the situation. The person who has that confidence, who can say what needs to be said and stop, who can receive the raised eyebrow without producing a paragraph, who can let the silence sit without filling it with justification, that person communicates something in their stillness that no amount of explanation could produce, that their decision stands on its own, that it does not require your agreement to remain standing, that the authority for it was always theirs. And the person who carries that quality, quietly, consistently, without performance or announcement, is the person in the room that others think twice before questioning. Not because they are feared, because they are read accurately as someone who does not negotiate their own legitimacy. And there is nothing more settling to be around, and nothing more difficult to manipulate, than a person who has already decided, and knows it, and does not need you to agree.